Hey, Detoxers, what's up? In the race to artificial general intelligence, what if the engines driving us forward are already breaking down? In June 2025, Apple quietly dropped a bombshell, a research paper titled The Illusion of Thinking. It revealed that even the most advanced AI models collapse under the weight of complex reasoning. These so called large reasoning models, the next step beyond tools like ChatGPT, didn't just underperform, they failed entirely. The paper's authors found that when tasks became too complex, the AI models stopped trying to think harder and instead reduced their reasoning effort. That's right, they gave up. But the tech world wasn't ready to hear it. AI boosters and online critics immediately rejected the findings, accusing Apple of being bitter about falling behind in the AI race or dismissing the research as flawed. The backlash reveals just how deeply invested the industry is in the illusion of progress. To cut through the noise, I'm joined by Gary Smith, author of the AI Delusion and professor of economics at Pomona College, to unpack what the paper really tells us about the future of AI. Gary Smith, how you doing?
I'm doing great. Yeah, thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure to have you. You're one of the most important voices in the space. So I like to always turn to you when I have questions. And boy, do I have questions.
Yeah, I'm a
So
big fan of you too. I love your writing. It seems very accurate, to point, and balanced, very fair. So I love what you write. So
thank you
very
so
honored to
much.
be here. Yeah,
And I wanted to have you on to discuss the reaction to this Apple study.
yeah,
But before we get into that, I'd love to hear your initial thoughts because there's been a lot of talk about the study. And to me, it seems to really confirm much of what you've written previously.
yeah,
But what do
yeah.
you say?
I think I want to give a little bit of background here. So, of course, in 2022, ChatGPT made its entrance, and it was a large language model. And as we all know, it was trained on these huge text databases, and it is a stochastic predictor of the next word in a sentence. And as such, by itself, not knowing what words mean or how words relate to the real world, it gave hilariously bad answers to a lot of questions. Like I remember some of the ones I asked were, "Is it safe to walk downstairs backwards if I close my eyes?" And the answer was, "It depends. Do you have a TV?" And another one was, "Can I climb a rope faster if I hold my ears with my hands?" And it said, "I don't know, but it's worth a try." And it just is garbage. And I think we quickly realized, including the makers of these large language models, that scaling up was not going to solve the problem of really bad answers. And so instead, what they went to this post training. And so they tried to clean it up, put band-aids on the problems by finding questions that they gave bad answers to and teaching them to give good answers, better answers. And in my view, that's a very limited form of intelligence, following instructions. It's not thinking for yourself, it's just doing what somebody tells you to do. And then the latest variant is, like you say, large reasoning models. And again, like artificial intelligence, intelligence and reasoning are very pejorative here. It's they're used to sell products, not to really describe what's going on. And the idea is to take a task, and not a simple task like what's the capital of California? I mean, that one you just go into your database of text and you find the answer. But these are reasoning questions. And so, for example, there's 100 items in a box. Half are circles, half are squares. Half the circles are blue, half are red. How many blue circles are there? And large language models often had trouble with questions like that. And so the idea was to break it up into steps, the same way you and I would solve the problem. We think first, well, there's 100 items, half are circles, so that's 50, and half the circles are blue, so that's 25. So there's 25 blue circles. And it sort of sounds like reasoning, but again, it's following instructions. And the question is whether that leads to intelligence in any meaningful sense of the word, like being able to figure out things for yourself and generalize ideas into other domains. And so what the Apple researchers did was they analyzed four different mathematical puzzles. And the reason they did puzzles was because you can scale them up to make them more or less complicated. And one of them was the Tower of Hanoi. And so that's the one where you've got a platform with three rods on it, and you have discs on the rods. And the discs are arranged like a pyramid. They have holes in the middle, and they sit on the rods like a pyramid, the smallest one on top and the largest on the bottom. And the challenge is to move that pyramid over to another rod. But the rules are you can only move one disc at a time, and you can never put a disc on another disk that's smaller than itself. You can only put it on a larger disk or on the platform. And it's a clever little puzzle and easily solved. But then you start making it complicated. Instead of 5 disks, you have 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10. And so the Apple researchers could make it more complicated to see how these so-called reasoning models do as problems get more complex. And another one was the river crossing problem, which is you got a farmer, and there's lots of variations of them. The one I like is you got a farmer, and he has a goat, a wolf, and a cabbage, and he has to get them across the river using a boat. But the boat can only carry the farmer and one other thing. And you can't leave the goat alone with the cabbage because it'll eat it. And you can't leave the goat alone with the fox or the wolf because the wolf will eat the goat. So how do you do that? And again, it's a little logic puzzle and you can figure out. And then you can make it more complicated by saying there's more than 3 things to get across the river, and the boat can carry more than 2 things, and so on and so forth. And so there are 4 of these puzzles, and they gave them to a bunch of purported large reasoning models, in particular DeepSeek and Claude, because DeepSeek and Claude have very parallel algorithms. One is a straightforward LLM with no quote unquote thinking, and the other one is an LLM with the reasoning thinking, and compare how they did. And as you said, they started out with very simple problems, and surprisingly, the LLMs, the large language models with no quote unquote reasoning, did better than the reasoning models. And then they went to more complicated questions, and the reasoning models, where you require several steps, and the reasoning models did better. But then you went to even more complicated problems, and they both completely collapsed, and they both scored 0%. And even when they gave them the algorithm, here's how you solve the Hanoi problem, here's how you solve the river crossing problem, they still couldn't figure out how to do it. And they're bumping up against the same problem, which is they're not really understanding what the problem is. They're just following directions, either stochastic parrots, like putting words together in plausible ways, or following the directions their trainers have told them. And they don't know how these words relate to the real world, and so they can't solve any kind of logical problems. So, for example, here's a problem I gave a while back. I just gave it yesterday. I gave it to Claude and also to DeepSeek's so-called reasoning problems. I call it rotational tic-tac-toe, 90-degree rotational tic-tac-toe. And so here's the thing. I have a new game, a variation on tic-tac-toe. I'm going to take the 3x3 grid and rotate it 90 degrees to the right. And it does nothing at all, right?
Right.
You and I, we know what a tic-tac-toe grid is. We know it doesn't change the look of it, doesn't change the play, it changes nothing. And these reasoning models, they go on for hundreds of words talking about what a clever, I mean, they're always very optimistic and, very supportive and sycophantic. What a great idea, what a beautiful idea, blah, 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 blah. And then I ask them, do you think it'd be better if I rotate it to the 90 degrees to the right or 90 degrees to the left? And they come back with these blah, blah, blah answers. And they always conclude 90 degrees to the left is better than 90 degrees to the right for some unknown, unknown reason. And it's because they're not thinking, they're not really reasoning. They're just either following instructions or they're using their stochastic parrot policies. Now, the other thing I want to say is these questions they gave, these puzzles, they were deliberately mathematical so you could scale up the complexity. But the things we want these things to do are not simple mathematical puzzles. The things that we hope they're going to be able to do is tell us, should this person be hired for a job? Should this mortgage application be approved? Should this person be sent to prison for 5 years or 3 years or no time at all? And those kinds of questions are not at all like mathematical puzzles. And large language models, with or without reasoning, are ill-equipped to answer any of those things because all they can talk about is general patterns or situations they've trained on. And so one of my favorite examples, I may have given this to you last time, so I apologize, is I'm a lawyer and I've got a client who's accused of murder. And we've gone down to don't settle till you see the whites of the jurors' eyes. The jury's been selected, and the prosecution approaches with a plea deal, a reduced sentence in exchange for pleading guilty. And I'm supposed to advise my client. And I'm not thinking about words that people have used in the past. I'm not thinking about statistical calculations. I'm thinking about this particular trial, this particular case, this particular evidence, these particular jurors, the confidence of the person I'm going up against, the arguments I will make. I'm using all these things which are very specific to this case. And what I'm coming up with is not the capital of California, Sacramento. What I'm coming up with is if we go to trial, here's what I think might happen. And here's my probabilistic assessment of the chances this or that will happen. And there's no way in heck that large language models, with or without reasoning, can do any of that. They can't analyze specific cases and particular sets of data and information and come up with subjective probabilities. They can't do any of that. And yet that's what these Sam Altman and the other promoters of large language models are touting, trying to raise money for, is we're going to turn our decisions over to large language models. It just annoys me immensely. I recently read Sam Altman talking about AI friends and how so many young people have used ChatGPT as their friend. And it's alluring because they're always positive and upbeat. They never criticize you. They can even be romantic. And he's saying, these are wonderful because you can ask them for advice. What? They are so bad. They have no way of giving useful advice. And the kinds of things they've done for people, documented, is they've advised people to commit suicide,
Mhm.
harm other people. There's a case, I can't remember, if it was Argentina or Italy, but some woman, she gave her husband a cup of coffee, and then she took a picture of the grounds that were left in the bottom of the coffee cup and showed it to ChatGPT. And ChatGPT said, your husband's having an affair. And so she filed for divorce. This is the kind of stuff. This is, and it's absolutely preposterous. And
It's
one of the lines I've come up with, I keep talking, I'm sorry.
no, no, wait, go for it.
One of the lines I've come up recently with is large language models and large reasoning models are really bad at doing good things and really good at doing bad things. And so, number one, of course, is disinformation, which you've written a lot about. And they're really good at disinformation, which is a bad thing. They're also really good at destroying education as we know it. And you got all these large colleges with overworked, underpaid professors who are teaching online classes, giving multiple choice tests, assigning essays and stuff. And it's increasingly be turned over to the ChatGPT and the other large language models. And I don't know if you know, but just this semester, the ChatGPT, Grok, they offered free 2 month subscriptions to students as their final exams approached and as their term papers were due. And Grok specifically said, good luck on your finals. And the idea is to hook people on cheating,
Mhm.
which means not learning anything. Just you get a question, you copy and paste over to ChatGPT, it gives you the answer, then you copy and paste the answer without any processing in between. And it's going to create even more inequality in this country, in that the people who are going to small colleges with discussion classes where professors can actually do in-person tests, can do oral exams, can do in-person class presentations, those kids are going to learn something. And the kids in the big universities and junior colleges are taking online courses and cheating their way through. They're not going to learn anything. They're not going to learn critical thinking or communication skills. And another example is, like I said, AI friends. This idea that your
Can
best
I,
friend is a computer.
Gary, can I stop you right there on just one other thing real quick before you go into that?
Yeah,
Because you wrote an article recently about that, and I wanted to bring it up in this interview because when
yeah,
I interviewed you last time, as your work is always, you've been very skeptical of the idea that AI is ever going to, anytime in the near future, pass human intelligence. But you wrote an article about how the title was something like LLMs may actually be smarter than humans. And I
yeah.
was sort of shocked to see you had published it, but you had an
That was the
interesting
hook.
take.
That was the hook.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit about what your take was next? I thought it was really
And so
fascinating.
it's based on this idea that increasingly, what do we want out of education? I'm a firm believer in education as a pathway for upward mobility and socioeconomic mobility. And I think it's just absolutely great. And increasingly turning education over to my bot is going to answer my questions for me. My bot's going to write my papers for me. I don't need to learn anything. It's going to create, like I said, this huge uneducated swath of the population. And if computers get smarter than humans, it won't be because computers are getting smarter. It's because humans are getting dumber. And so that's the punchline on the hook.
I thought that was such a great article. And you also mentioned disinformation a
Yeah.
moment ago as well. And I've been watching the coverage of the protests and clashes with the National Guard, police, and now apparently the Marines in Los Angeles. And I mean, you live much closer to this than I do, but I noticed online there's a ton of videos
Yep.
out there that are AI generated that show like
Yep.
these protesters celebrating violence.
Yep.
There's one of Gavin
Yep.
Newsom
Yep.
combing his hair with a mirror in the middle of the violence.
Rioting. I don't know. I was paid to be here and I just want to destroy stuff. Is what you are doing illegal?
Well, these are peaceful protests. Even that guy over there says so.
They look pretty real, and people are
Yeah.
sharing them. So I wonder, what do you make of that with your research on AI?
That I don't know what to do. It's like they're really good at doing bad things, and they're really good at creating fake images, populating the internet with fake stories. I saw something the other day. It's estimated half the things on the internet are AI generated, and that seems an exaggeration, but a lot of that stuff, so much of that stuff out there, is just, and it's there in web pages, it's in your Facebook, it's in your Instagram, it's in your TikTok. This stuff, just an absolute deluge of garbage, and I don't know what can be done about it. It's just, it's scary.
Well, what did you make? What actually I saw the study and I thought, okay, I'll have Gary on. But one of the things that made me want to get you on sooner rather than later was I don't know, taken back. I don't know what kind of response you get for your work, but I was sort of taken back by the reaction to the study itself. So I want to know your
Yeah,
reaction to the reaction, because it seemed like to me a lot of uh, AI boosters were out there trying to disparage the study, and I come from the media literacy world, so this is like an age
yeah,
old
yeah,
debate where those of
yeah,
us the critical camp, we reject the corporate influence on education and scholarship, and then there's the
yeah, yeah,
non-critical
yeah.
folks who don't care. I see that reemerging here with AI. So what did you make of the reaction to
Well, it
the
was
study?
several years ago. I don't remember the exact year, but the National Marketing Association of America, whatever the name of that trade group is, chose as their marketing word of the year AI. And it sounds so amazing, especially ChatGPT is so convincing, so authoritative. It sounds so intelligent, although it's confident, always confident and often wrong. I mean, it's very persuasive stuff. And these cheerleaders, these boosters, these hypesters, these hucksters, they're selling stuff. They're either selling their advice or they're trying to raise money to do other things and line their pocketbooks. And that thing about large language models are really good at doing bad things. I think it's just absolutely scandalous. It's like the tobacco companies, it's like the opioid companies, and they have these internal studies which say how bad this stuff is, and yet to the world they present this face of, oh no, it's not addictive. Oh no, tobacco doesn't harm you. Oh no, opioids aren't addictive. And ChatGPT the same way. Oh, Sam Altman says it's great to have an AI friend you can confide in and ask for advice. And on the education, Altman says, oh, it's great because now students have individual tutors who can help them learn things. Well, that's not what students are learning this for. It's like, oh no, tobacco's not addictive. Oh, opioids aren't addictive. It's shameful the way that they're misleading. And so the reaction to this Apple report, I think it's shameful. I mean, they know the limitations of their products, but they can't say them publicly because they're trying to raise money. And so they got to put their head in the sand. I don't know, that's the right analogy, but they got to lie through their teeth.
You mentioned something else earlier too that I thought I haven't heard you talk about before, but something I've been paying attention to, which is the quick adoption of so-called artificial intelligence models to a lot of these areas that are critical to our existence. You brought up the courtroom, of course, but things like social service allocation or budgeting, or there's companies
Yeah.
now who, like you said, are screening candidates and things like that. For people out there who are listening who maybe are potentially a decision maker in one of those areas, what's some advice you would give them on maybe where, if anywhere, these AI tools are good and where they're bad?
I don't know if you just be very, very, very skeptical. And so one of the red flags I've seen several times is there was a company that would screen job applicants for you. And it said it was based on a lot of study of what existing, say, looking for software engineers. What do software engineers do? And they found that a lot of software engineers went to some Japanese manga site. And so used that as a screening device for new job applicants. And the chief officer in charge of this project said, obviously it's not causal, and also said we're constantly changing the variables we use in our screening. Well, that's the red flag. If you're constantly changing the variables, that means they're not working.
And yeah.
If you actually found something that worked, you wouldn't be changing it all the time. And it was the same thing. Admiral Insurance was going to price car insurance based on the words you used on Facebook. And they gave some examples of, do you like Michael Jordan or Leonard Cohen? And then they went off in some other stuff. And their big thing was, we don't use fixed ideas of what is safe or not safe drivers. Instead, we use the words on Facebook, which are constantly changing. And again, if they're constantly changing, it's because they don't work.
Yeah.
And in that case, Facebook actually stepped in the day before it was supposed to be launched and said, we have a provision that you cannot use Facebook posts for priced insurance. Well, I don't know why that provision was in there, but and so Admiral Insurance was saved from its own silliness. But whenever people advertise you, we're very flexible. We're always changing the way we do this. Well, that means you haven't got something that works. Something works in the past, but it doesn't work in the future. There's this Danish proverb, it's very hard to make predictions, especially about the future. And these models are really good at making predictions about the past, finding statistical correlations that would have worked in the past, but are terrible at making predictions about the future. I don't know if you know this study I just did maybe 2 months ago. It was a study of mutual funds that are powered by AI.
No.
And so there were 10 funds that are completely mutual funds, or ETFs, that are completely AI driven, no human intervention whatsoever. And every single one of them has done worse than the S&P 500. And it's like a 5 percentage point per year difference. And then there's I can't remember the exact number, I think 44 funds that are partly AI, in that they use AI to scan the past data and come up with recommendations, but humans can intervene and override them. And it was 2/3 of them have done worse than the S&P 500, 1/3 have done better, and they've only done worse by about 2% a year instead of 5% a year. So the human intervention helped a little bit, but it's that whole idea that we look at past data, we find patterns and correlations, and we're going to make decisions about how long are you going to go into jail? Am I going to give you a job? Am I going to approve that mortgage application? How much am I going to charge you for car insurance? Make these decisions based on past statistical patterns is very dodgy. And
Yeah, that's always been a critique I've had of big tech, is they talk so much about humans, but everything they do really dismisses or disregards humans, right? That we're too stupid, we're too biased, we make too
yeah,
many mistakes. Like the whole way they talk about the human race is negative, and I think a lot of folks have internalized that, right? They say,
yeah,
"Well, just chat GPT the answer."
yeah. Well, these mutual funds, you look at the prospectuses, and they all talk about the ones that are completely AI driven. We remove the human element because humans are prone to irrational decisions, subjective biases, and blah, 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 blah. And we need to turn over computers because computers are not subject to biases and prejudices and stuff like that, as if that's a good thing. And taking it away from humans, and actually using common sense and logic. Well, Silicon Valley's always had this thing: fake it till you make it, and that's where we are with AI here. Is just this pretense that we've actually achieved, or anywhere close to AGI. Altman says we're going to achieve AGI this year, 2025. And Elon Musk says the same, but Elon Musk is known for his wild, wild, overly enthusiastic projections.
Well, maybe I'll have you back on in January 2026 to rub it in
You can
their
say, "I
face.
told you so."
Yep. So Gary, remind folks where they can follow your work. And I just want to tell our audience, you really should follow Gary's work. If you're someone who's trying to figure out the whole AI issue, Gary publishes constantly, and his stuff is really accessible and always on point. So where can folks find more of your work, Gary?
Well, my website is Gary Smith, GarySmithN, like Nancy, GarySmithN.com. And I've got books and research papers and hundreds of op-eds there, opinion pieces there. So I like to write.
We like to read it. Thank you so much for coming on the Disinfo Detox. We'll definitely have you back. Thanks so much.
Okay. Yeah, it was great talking to you as always.
Hey, Detoxers. Thanks for tuning in to the Disinfo Detox. If you're enjoying the content, head over to nolanhigdon.substack.com for full access to the podcast as well as other original essays. Want to support the Detox? Consider becoming a paid subscriber. You'll get early and exclusive access to interviews, podcasts, essays, and more. If a subscription's not in the cards for you right now, no worries. Just like, share, subscribe, comment, and follow. It helps grow the audience and spread the word. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and keep detoxing the disinfo.